Okay, so I'm going to give a go at a screencast on explaining question 1 of the iGCSE reading paper. This is the extended paper on the 0522 syllabus that I'm going to talk about. Right, so I'm going to use the paper from June 2012. If you have this paper, it might be useful to have it in front of you. If you have another example of a paper, please get it out, have it in front of you, and you can sort of follow the steps that I describe and pause the video at a convenient time so you're following my instructions as I give them. So to start off with, this is a question from June 2012. Imagine you are the newspaper reporter working in a nearby town. Write a report using this headline: Lone fisherman survives storm of the century. In your report, you should include the following: what happened to the fisherman in his surroundings, why he refused to leave his home, and how this will affect his way of life in the future. Now, for me, even before you've read passage A in the exam, you should be reading the question first, and you should be starting to think about precisely what the question's asking you. Now, I've put a little green box around that, the bit in bold there, because I think it's important you use the words they've given you. If they've given you an opening sentence, you must use it because it will help focus you on the precise question. What you'll also notice straight away from this question 1, you will never know precisely what type of writing you'll be asked. There are several different options. So when you read the question in an exam or any time you practice, think really carefully about whose point of view you're writing from and what writing you need to produce. So from this I can tell straight away that I'm imagining I'm a newspaper reporter working in a nearby town. So I need to straight away get into the mindset of a newspaper reporter and what they do, and obviously they provide news information for people nearby. And I've been asked to write a report. Now for me this is more or less the same as writing a newspaper article, because I know that I'm a newspaper reporter, so I'm obviously writing a report that I imagine will appear in a newspaper. And every time you get this question, you'll always get 3 bullet points, and you must focus on these during your answer. Okay, so I want to just mention briefly about the different writing styles you might be asked to complete, because there is a little bit of a range here. You might be asked to write an interview or a talk or a conversation. Now that means that you have to adapt your writing to sound like the person speaking. If it's an interview, it has been a couple of times in the past, you need to make your writing sound like the person being interviewed. So if it's a parent, think about how a mother or a father should sound. If it's someone who, I don't know, in one of the examples, a rock climber, think about how he might sound, that rock climber, in another example. You might be asked to write a journal or a letter. So you need to write that in the first person. You need to think about who are you pretending to be someone else when writing a letter, or are you pretending to be someone else when writing a journal? That's really important. And finally, we've got the newspaper article / report, which is perhaps a little more formal. And obviously, newspaper articles tend to be a bit less personal, might be written in the third person, and will be more formal and more like sort of written language, whereas an interview or a talk, you will be making your writing sound a little bit closer to how spoken language sounds. So after you've read the question, you know exactly what writing style you're going to have to do. You've thought about what that writing style is like. You need to make sure it's really clear in your head about what you're actually going to do and how you'll be marked. Now, 20 marks for question 1, 15 for reading and 5 for writing. So obviously it's heavily weighted towards your reading marks. The people who do really well in question 1 show that they thoroughly understand the passage. And that means covering all 3 bullet points in detail. It won't do to cover 1 really well and perhaps the other 2 not as well. So you need to make sure that you stick to those bullet points and demonstrate your understanding through how you respond to them. You need to use supporting detail, so that means selecting details from the passage when you're doing your bit of writing, and develop these ideas. So it's not all about just taking facts from the passage. You have to think about who you're writing from and how they might feel, and add ideas that you've thought of, add your own inferences. Third one there is about convincingly representing the characters and events. This is specifically very important if you're speaking from someone's point of view. You need to think about how that person would sound. In this June 2012 example, the whole passage is the diary entry from a man called Adam. So when I write my newspaper report, I need to show that I really understand Adam. I understand how he thinks, I understand what he feels, and what he's been through. And finally, at the bottom it says you have to adapt the information into your own words, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. So, hopefully you've got a good idea how you'll be marked. If you've got a question in front of you, you've read the question, and in your exam I would always say try and read the question before you read the passage so you know what details you're looking for. Now, it's really important that you think carefully about these bullet points here. And every time, think carefully about the bullet points. They'll not always ask you the same things, really. Sometimes the bullet points will ask you to find factual information, and they might be quite easy. So in this instance, the top bullet point, what happened to the fisherman and his surroundings, I know that that's actually quite easy to find information in the passage about that, because in the first couple of paragraphs, it just sort of explains what happened to him. Now, the second bullet point, why he refused to leave his home, I might have to add a few more of my ideas there, because I have to try and make sure I understand who Adam is and what his reasons are about staying in this place are. And the final bullet point, for me, how will this affect his way of life in the future? Straight away, it sounds a little bit more difficult, because it's asking you to think about his future life, even though this isn't really mentioned in the text. So even before you read the passage, you might start thinking about, okay, what am I being asked here? Not all the bullet points are equally difficult. For some bullet points, more inference is needed. It might not always be the third bullet point, but often you might get to this third bullet point, and you might think, oh, I can't really find any information about that. Well, you have to use inference. You have to create your own ideas based on details from the passage. Okay, preparing to answer. You've read the question, you understand the bullet points. I would probably jot the bullet points down at the top of the page so I don't have to keep flicking back and remembering them, because when I read this passage, I'm going to be really active about my thinking, and I'm constantly going to be thinking about which details from this passage I might use in my answer. And then as I read it through, I might start to draw some squares or underline things I can use. So here, where it says the community used to be thriving, I think that's a bit about what happened to him and his surroundings. 80 years ago, the place was alive. It's dangerous living there. Storms have destroyed almost everything. This is stuff I'm going to use for bullet point 1. So when I read it through, so that I remember that, I might just put B1, storms destroyed his home. Just make some notes. B1 used to be busy, so we know that it used to be a thriving environment. And I might do the same if I find other details, like here. I think all these details in green might actually be something I can talk about why he refused to leave. So when you read the passage, make sure you've got the bullet points in mind. Start picking the information, underlining it, circling it, and make those notes. B1, I'm going to use this for bullet point 1 later. B2, I'll use this for bullet point 2. So this is all about preparing to answer. Maybe take about sort of 10 minutes to read the passage really carefully, maybe even 15, so that you can get a really clear plan about what you're going to say. Obviously, if I do it this way, when I go and write my response, I can sort of tick off when I use these details. Okay, now, bullet point 3, his way of life in the future. And you might read a bullet point, you might read the passage, and you might think, oh my god, I don't know where the details are, I couldn't find any in the passage. Here, the passage is all about the present, but the bullet wants me to talk about his life in the future. How am I going to do that? Well, I have to make my own inferences. If you want, you can pause the video and read this through, but I read this information and I read And in his diary he says he wants to be a hero. He desires to be a hero. So my mind's working away here, and I think, well, maybe he'll never leave. Um, Maybe he hopes to one day die defending his home. It says when the storm is over, he might hear his favourite music. My brain's working away here, and I'm thinking, does that mean he's going to die there? He says he's almost waiting to be swept away into the depths a bit earlier on. Does this mean he'll never leave? He's in a fight with this ocean. Maybe he's never willing to give up. Maybe he doesn't want to move away. I have to interpret this, and I have to be creative and add my own ideas. Okay, answering the question, one thing you must avoid is mechanical references. And by that I mean just copying details from the text. I'm not going to read this to you, but feel free to pause it. And what you'll notice that on the left I've taken a quote from the text, and on the right is something a student might do in their newspaper report. And you'll see that they've used the same wording, and really you will get marked down if you use the same wording. It's much more important, here you've got the same two boxes here, it's much more important for you to actually try and develop those ideas, put them in your own words, and add some extra information. So I know this is a bit silly, but I've just called this town Troutville. Why not? It is a fishing village after all. But I can be creative, I can give it a name, and I've said it used to be a busy, bustling village with a successful fishing industry which attracted merchants and traders from miles around. Obviously, I'm taking this word thriving, and I haven't just used the word thriving. I'm showing I understand this word because I am putting it in my own words. I'm avoiding using the word thriving, and I'm adding extra details about there being merchants and traders visiting. It's really important that you're able to take those details from the text, put them in your own words, and develop it with your own ideas. Okay, so here is my attempt at bullet point 2. If you want to pause and read it, then please do. What you'll notice is that I am taking details from the text, I am rephrasing them into my own words, I'm developing it with my own ideas, and I'm being a bit creative. This is a newspaper report, so if you look at that phrase in bold, sources close to Mr. Richards, I'm putting myself in the character of a newspaper reporter who would do research, who might ask people about Adam, who the diary is from. Obviously, I've made up the name Mr. Richards, and you can do that, provided all you're doing is showing your understanding of the text. If you're being asked to write a newspaper, why not quote someone who might be near to Mr. Richards, maybe his children, and sort of come up with a line that they might have said. Okay, I'm just going to recap sort of everything I've gone through. Obviously, I went quite quickly over that. Please go back and pause and read over what I've said. Step 1, read the bullet points carefully so you know exactly what details you were looking for. I would suggest doing that even before you've read the passage. Read those bullet points. Jot the bullet points down at the top of your page. When you are reading the passage, read it with a pen in your hand and your brain working. Every sentence, every paragraph you read, you need to think, how will I use this information? Does it fit into those bullet points? Exactly how am I going to rephrase this information into my own words, and how am I going to develop it with my own ideas? So actively reading the passage, make those notes. Spend 10 minutes reading and maybe 5 minutes planning. Bullet point exactly what details from the passage you're going to use for your answer. Step 3, write your answer using details from the passage. Cover all 3 bullet points equally. That is vitally important. It is very unlikely you'll get the top grades that you want unless all 3 bullet points are covered equally. So if you're asked to write a page and a half, that's a good half a page, depending on the size of your handwriting, on each bullet point, even the difficult ones. And remember, for the difficult ones, you might have to develop those details with your own inferences. Remember, you're using facts from the passage. You've got to show your understanding of the passage, but you must put that information in your own words, and you should explore those details and come up with your own ideas based on what the words in the passage say. Remember who you're writing from, which character you're writing from, what style of writing you're doing, interview newspaper, and think really carefully about how you're going to stick to that throughout your work.